The date was Monday, the 29th of January, 2018. A sleek private aircraft descended onto the tarmac at a secluded Hampshire airfield. On the surface, everything appeared routine. A small flight crew, several passengers, and luggage being carefully removed from the plane. Yet, as customs officers started their standard inspection procedures, something about those bags triggered their attention. Fast forward to Wednesday, 20th September 2023. Over 5 years had passed, and more than 200 miles northward, a separate enforcement team closed in on a farm access road in the Welsh countryside. An open trailer sat motionless in the farmyard. The area was silent, devoid of activity, yet there was an unmistakable sense that whatever had been transpiring here had gone on far too long, and was finally reaching its conclusion. 2 operations, 2 locations seemingly unrelated, yet both concealing secrets that would eventually pull investigators directly toward them. This is the account of how a high-end flight into Farnborough and an isolated Welsh farm became focal points of 2 major drug conspiracies uncovered by UK authorities, and how both ultimately unraveled. Welcome to Truth Unraveled. Let's examine these cases. Before their identities became public through court proceedings, the 4 individuals central to this conspiracy appeared entirely unremarkable. Martin Neal, residing in Poole, Dorset, earned his income as a bricklayer. He maintained steady construction projects around sandbanks and was recognized locally as nothing more than a working tradesman. Alejandro Yembo, the youngest member at 28, held down 2 jobs, working shifts at the Wetherspoons establishment in Bournemouth while also making pizza deliveries. Victor Franco Lorenzo, a Spanish national living in Bournemouth, moved between various hospitality positions. Jose Ramon Miguez Bass, the eldest at 56, worked as a hairdresser in Valladolid and frequently traveled between Spain and Britain for employment. Their jobs, daily patterns and lifestyles gave no indication of involvement in transnational criminal activity. The group carefully constructed an image built around wealth, modern business ventures, and entertainment industry connections, a facade engineered to legitimize their movements. Central to their planning was an individual calling herself Claire Harris. She contacted Diamante Jets, a private aviation company, claiming to represent wealthy clients engaged in cryptocurrency investments and music production. She chartered aircraft on their behalf, specified particular ground handling services, and made every payment in cash. Their choice to utilize private jets was strategic. Rather than face scrutiny at major transportation hubs like Heathrow or Gatwick, facilities with substantial passenger traffic and fully staffed border control units, the group consistently selected Farnborough, a smaller executive airfield. While Farnborough did maintain border force personnel, the presence was minimal compared to larger airports. This vulnerability exists throughout the UK. Over 3,000 small airstrips operate nationwide, many functioning with limited oversight. Criminal organizations frequently view these smaller facilities as advantageous entry points, particularly for high-value shipments or discrete movements. However, their ordinary appearances and fabricated identities were merely surface level. Within weeks, an initial test operation would demonstrate the extent of their preparation and how determined the network was to evade detection. The events of early December 2017 were later recognized as the trial run, the first complete demonstration of how the operation planned to transport narcotics, currency, and personnel between the UK and Colombia without attracting official attention. On December 8, 2017, 3 members, Alejandro Yembo, Victor Franco Lorenzo, and Martin Neal, departed Luton Airport aboard a privately chartered jet paid for entirely in cash. The booking, arranged once again through Claire Harris, totaled approximately £128,500 paid up front. She insisted that a specific Colombian ground handling firm, Central Charter, managed the aircraft upon landing in Bogotá. Investigators would later interpret this insistence as evidence of pre-arranged coordination between UK-based members and Colombian counterparts. Notably absent from this journey was José Ramón Míguez Bas. His exclusion from the rehearsal would gain significance later, indicating how responsibilities shifted between flights and suggesting the December trip served as a proof of concept rather than a fully operational run. The flight route itself raised questions. The return leg included a stopover in the Azores, a detail that stood out when subsequently compared to typical private jet paths between Colombia and Britain. Most significant, however, was what occurred upon their return on December 11th. At Farnborough Airport, a chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce Phantom awaited the men, a detail reinforcing their constructed persona as cryptocurrency entrepreneurs and music industry professionals supposedly traveling to connect with performer Bruno Mars. From the airport, they proceeded to a Bromley address, transporting multiple suitcases with them. Border Force officers conducted no searches. There was no inspection, no interference, no discovery. The group completed their journey without incident. Months afterward, when investigators reconstructed the trip, they uncovered X-ray images from Colombia, displaying suitcases stuffed with substantial quantities of banknotes linked to that December flight. These images hadn't surfaced during the actual travel period. They were retrieved following the January arrests and supplied crucial evidence indicating cash had likely been smuggled out of Britain. If accurate, this meant the December journey wasn't merely reconnaissance. It was a financial transaction directly connected to the larger smuggling conspiracy. That quiet December operation proved their method could succeed. What followed in January would push the same approach to its absolute limit, with additional participants, more baggage, and significantly higher risks. By late January 2018, the group had already confirmed that a private jet could complete a full round trip to Bogotá without meaningful intervention. This time, every preparation phase was more calculated, more systematic. On January 25, 2018, José Ramón Míguez Bas travelled from Spain to the United Kingdom, checking into a Premier Inn in Bournemouth, near where both Martin Neal and Alejandro Yembo resided. That same evening, all group members travelled to the Chelsea Harbour Hotel in London. The upscale accommodation, like their use of luxury transportation, reinforced the elaborate narrative they'd been cultivating. On January 26th, premium vehicles arrived at the hotel to transport the group to Luton Signature Airport. These cars carried the men, along with a conspicuously large amount of baggage, 12 suitcases, far exceeding what would be expected for a brief international visit. Investigators later emphasized that the sheer volume of luggage created a memorable impression, showing how the operation depended on confidence and theatrical presentation rather than subtlety. Meanwhile, arrangements for the second flight were already finalized. The booking mirrored the December pattern almost identically, approximately £138,500 paid in cash, coordinated by the same woman using the same explanations and specifying the same handling company upon arrival, indicating whoever managed the Colombian end required a specific ground crew. When the private jet touched down at El Dorado International Airport in Bogotá, operational control transferred to the Colombian side of the conspiracy. El Dorado ranks among South America's busiest airports, yet the group's luggage appeared to pass through a highly irregular chain of custody. Colombian authorities later determined that criminals in Bogotá had implemented coordinated tactics, ensuring the cargo moved without standard scrutiny. Among these elements was a reportedly corrupt airport ground handling employee, whose access privileges and authority enabled the operation to proceed within restricted zones. The suitcases themselves were allegedly transported to the aircraft using armored vehicles, not a casual or improvised method, but a transport procedure typically reserved for high-risk transfers or sensitive cargo. One of the most remarkable details revealed later by Colombian investigators involved a fraudulent police officer accompanied by a fake detection dog. This imposter conducted a staged inspection of the suitcases before loading. The entire performance had a single purpose: creating the appearance of legitimate screening while deterring any genuine officer from re-inspecting the luggage. With the charade complete, the bags, now containing hundreds of kilograms of cocaine, were loaded onto the aircraft as though they had passed official checks. The cocaine had been prepared and packaged well before the jet's arrival. Each kilogram brick was tightly wrapped, highly uniform, and marked with cartel identifiers. Some displayed the Superman logo, a symbol frequently associated with particular Colombian trafficking organizations. Others showed an Esco imprint, interpreted by investigators as a probable reference to Pablo Escobar or the broader Medellin legacy. For UK investigators, what transpired in Bogotá became essential in proving the conspiracy's scale and deliberate nature. By the time the jet departed Bogotá, the suitcases contained far more than clothing. The groundwork laid in Colombia would soon collide with the scrutiny awaiting them in the UK, marking the beginning of the end for the operation. When the aircraft entered UK airspace on January 29, 2018, the men aboard had every reason to believe events were unfolding exactly as they had weeks earlier during the December run. However, Border Force officers had already been alerted to the flight's arrival. Within minutes, officers identified several indicators justifying deeper inspection: the number of suitcases, inconsistencies in the passengers' accounts, and the context of the earlier December trip. The decision was made for enhanced checks, and the group was escorted to a search facility. What transpired in that room later became central to the case narrative. Officers opened the suitcases and initially discovered a scattering of women's and children's clothing, evidently placed to suggest legitimate travel. Beneath that thin layer, however, lay the operation's reality. Wrapped tightly in tape and arranged in layers, 513 individual kilogram blocks of cocaine were revealed. The purity averaged around 79%, exceptionally high for a shipment intended for wholesale distribution. The total weight approached half a ton, with a wholesale value of approximately £15.39 million and a potential street value exceeding £41 million. CCTV footage captured the unfolding discovery from multiple angles. These recordings became some of the most widely circulated images connected to the case, providing visual documentation of what had otherwise been a covert international drug movement. Once the first block appeared on camera, the operation was no longer a performance of luxury travel. It had become one of the largest drug seizures flown into the UK in years, and the turning point from which everything else in the case flowed. By the time officers completed their search at Farnborough, the cocaine discovery was only the beginning. What followed was the gradual assembly of an evidence structure that prosecutors later described as clear, deliberate, and increasingly difficult for the defendants to dispute. Much of this framework came from devices seized during the arrests: mobile phones, travel documents, and movement records that collectively mapped the group's involvement long before the January flight. Among the seized items were multiple mobile phones, some used for routine communication and others reserved for more discreet contact. Most notable was the encrypted handset recovered from Alejandro Yembo, pointing toward a level of security awareness associated with organized networks rather than four men acting independently. Even without full message content, the phone's existence contributed to the prosecution's argument that the group were taking instruction from others situated higher in the chain. Call data analysis provided the next strand. Investigators traced communication patterns between the men across the charge window from October 30th, 2017 to January 30th, 2018. These records showed frequent contact during key planning phases, travel coordination, and immediately before and after both flights. Physical evidence from both trips was catalogued systematically: boarding passes, hotel receipts, vehicle hire records, and payment documentation. Each piece reinforced the prosecution's timeline and demonstrated how intricately the movements had been coordinated. Perhaps most damaging were the X-ray images retrieved from Colombian authorities, showing suitcases packed with currency during the December flight, directly contradicting any innocent explanation for that journey. Piece by piece, this evidence formed a coherent picture. Communications, movements, behavior at airports, and the almost brazen presentation of the luggage itself, together they established a foundation strong enough to support the case that the January seizure was not an accident or misunderstanding, but the culmination of a carefully planned operation. The case entered Woolwich Crown Court in early 2019, where prosecutors began presenting the full sequence of flights, bookings, and movements behind the smuggling operation. What emerged across this phase was a careful dismantling of the defense explanations. One initial narrative suggested the trips had a charitable dimension. Some defendants claimed they believed they were traveling on behalf of One Young World, a respected international charity supposedly for youth-focused humanitarian work. The prosecution quickly established that One Young World had no record, no correspondence, no involvement, and no awareness of any of the men. That explanation collapsed immediately. The defense then shifted to a more glamorous narrative, the notion that the men had traveled as part of the music industry and were heading to Bogotá to meet Bruno Mars. Investigators acknowledged that Bruno Mars had performed in Colombia during the relevant time frame in December. However, beyond that coincidence, no evidence existed of any meeting, invitation, backstage access, studio session, or industry connection. No records linked the men to event organizers or management. The celebrity's name had been used purely because it sounded credible. Running alongside these broader cover stories was a more personal defense centered on Stephen Neal, who joined the group on the January flight. His legal team argued he had no meaningful involvement in planning, no insight into the suitcases being transported, and no reason to distrust those inviting him. Ultimately, the jury accepted that the prosecution could not prove he possessed knowledge of the cocaine. He was acquitted. For the remaining 4 defendants, however, that reasoning did not hold. All 4 men were found guilty of fraudulent evasion of a prohibition on a Class A drug, reflecting their participation in both the December rehearsal and the January importation. Neal, Yembo, and Franco Lorenzo each received sentences of 24 years imprisonment. Because Miguez Bass only participated in the final January flight and not the December rehearsal, he received a slightly reduced term of 20 years. The courtroom decisions did not mark the end of the case. In Colombia, where the suitcases were loaded, authorities launched a parallel investigation. 5 individuals were arrested, with early findings pointing to corrupt access within El Dorado Airport. For the National Crime Agency and Border Force, the case exposed a dangerous vulnerability. Smaller airports used primarily for executive travel, not designed for high-volume customs checks, presented attractive gateways for organized crime. As this case closed, investigators were already confronting another operation whose scale and ambition would challenge everything they understood about criminal logistics. From the outside, it resembled just another surge in cocaine appearing across Britain's major cities. Behind the scenes, investigators would soon uncover something far more ambitious: an industrial-scale pipeline engineered from thousands of miles away. Between May and September 2023, a transnational network coordinated from overseas, including command figures based in Dubai, quietly constructed a supply chain stretching from South America through mainland Europe and deep into the UK's criminal economy. This wasn't a single shipment or one-off gamble. It was a continuous conveyor belt designed to feed Britain's cocaine market with reliability, volume, and precision. According to assessments later made by the Northwest Regional Organised Crime Unit, the network's objective wasn't modest profit or local distribution. It was sustained national supply, the kind of capacity only the highest-tier criminal infrastructures can achieve. Their estimate was stark. 2 to 3 tons of cocaine were expected to move through the pipeline, enough to influence wholesale prices across the country. Every long-running drug pipeline requires someone who can cross borders without provoking questions. Someone whose routine appears so ordinary it becomes invisible. In this network, that role belonged to 48-year-old Guy Remington. He traveled alone, driving a specially adapted vehicle due to paralysis, towing a compact trailer behind him. To anyone observing him pass through Eurotunnel terminals, he appeared exactly as he presented himself, a disabled man running a small, steady cross-channel business. Behind that quiet exterior was the courier the entire operation depended on. Between May 3rd and September 21st, 2023, Remington made 9 trips through the Eurotunnel. Each journey followed the same pattern. He left the UK, crossed into mainland Europe, remained there just long enough for a handover, and returned with the same calm, unchanging routine. He operated under a business front, a simple commercial explanation that justified frequent travel and trailer use. Meanwhile, the true strength of the pipeline lay inside the trailer itself. What appeared as ordinary wooden interior paneling concealed engineered hides that made the system work. The construction was basic by design: timber boards, screws, and joinery that blended perfectly into the trailer's structure. Only by knowing the precise points to press or remove could the panels be lifted. There were no electronic switches or welded false floors, no visible signs of tampering. Even a trained officer would have needed specific intelligence to justify dismantling the trailer. While couriers moved product across borders, the real machinery of the UK end was being constructed in North Wales, at a place few would ever notice: Tyro's Goch, a remote farm tucked along a thin, single-track lane outside Holywell. To most people, it resembled any other quiet rural property: an aging farmhouse, outbuildings weathered by time, fields stretching toward the tree line. But to Luke Hurst, the 37-year-old tenant who controlled the site, Tyro's Goch was more than farmland. It was the perfect hub for an industrial-scale cocaine distribution centre. He was the man waiting on the UK side, the coordinator who transformed a quiet rural property into a node capable of feeding multiple cities. From there, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham and beyond were only hours away, remote enough to hide, central enough to supply. The brilliance of the setup lay in the handover method. Customers never arrived at the farm directly. Instead, meetings took place at neutral points, service stations along the A55 or the quiet stretch of Pinfold Lane. Hurst or another trusted member would collect a customer's vehicle there, drive it to the farm, load it behind closed doors, and return the car to its owner at the pickup point. For months, the system worked exactly as designed. If Tyro's Goch was the engine room, the downstream networks were the arteries. One key figure in this secondary layer was Thomas Smith, a Liverpool-based distributor in his early 40s. His role was quieter, methodical, and critical. Investigators later found he made frequent journeys to North Wales, arriving at predetermined handover points where vehicles were swapped for loading runs to Tyro's Goch. In the south, another crucial figure played a different but equally essential role. Morgan Towner, a 47-year-old courier from Surrey, operated hundreds of miles from the Welsh base, but remained tightly plugged into the same system. His job was running southbound loads, transporting shipments from the farm deep into the home counties and beyond. The van Towner used looked innocuous, the kind you might see parked outside any tradesman's house. But inside, officers later uncovered a professionally built hidden compartment, concealed so seamlessly that even trained search teams initially missed it. The linkage between these men became unmistakable when investigators began analyzing seized devices. Phones contained message threads referencing drops, collections, and countdown timings that matched movements captured on ANPR cameras and Eurotunnel records to the minute. For months, the Northwest Regional Organized Crime Unit had been monitoring the movements of the man they believed was the courier at the pipeline's heart. 8 runs had already been logged, but it was the 9th run that tipped the balance. On September 18, 2023, officers observed what they had come to expect: Remington leaving the UK alone, towing the same trailer. The unit didn't just record the departure, they treated it as the final piece of the pattern they'd been building. They understood that stopping Remington at the border risked losing the wider network, but allowing him to re-enter could lead straight to the distribution hub, and if surveillance held, they could take everyone involved in one decisive strike. On September 20th, 2023, surveillance units were positioned. When the trailer was opened and unloading began, officers moved in within seconds. Inside the trailer and farm buildings, investigators uncovered approximately 505 kilograms of cocaine and around 108 kilograms of heroin, a combined street value approaching £64 million. It was one of the largest single mixed drug seizures the region had ever seen. Both Remington and Hurst were arrested immediately. In Remington's vehicle alone, officers recovered £183,865 in cash. Searches at his home uncovered more than £700,000 in cash, multiple vehicles, and high-value assets. Thomas Smith was arrested on October 18, 2023. A search revealed 0.5 kilogram of cocaine and 9,987 MDMA tablets. Morgan Towner was detained on October 26 in Leatherhead. On November 2, 2023, at Chester Crown Court, all 4 men entered guilty pleas. On March 21, 2024, sentences were delivered. Thomas Smith and Guy Remington each received 18 years. Luke Hurst was jailed for 12 years, and Morgan Towner received 7 years, a combined 55 years of imprisonment. What are your thoughts on these cases and the sentences? Share your views in the comments below.